A call came into the Houston Chronicle, and I verified this with somebody at the Chronicle. Between the time the first Mary Morris was killed and the time my friend was killed, saying something to the effect that they got the wrong Mary Morris the first time.
So what you just heard there was a woman by the name of Lori Gemmel. She was a friend and co-worker of the second Mary Morris, who we're going to talk about here in this next episode. She was doing an interview with Unsolved Mysteries. And during one of her interviews, she explained how that she verified with the Houston Chronicle that shortly after the unsolved murder of the first Mary Morris and before the murder of the second Mary Morris, that they, at the Houston Chronicle, had received a phone call from a stranger with a male voice saying they got the wrong Mary Morris. Now, if you had listened to part 1 of this podcast, you'll remember that this was something that I had broadcasted, but there's a problem here, folks, because according to another podcast called The Murder of Mary Morris Part 3, and it's here on YouTube, I'm going to post a link to it in the description down below. But according to the two hosts of this podcast, they have recently contacted the Houston Chronicle, where they were told that, in fact, they never received such a phone call. And after an internet search, I have been unable to find any article ever written by the Houston Chronicle where they in fact ever reported ever receiving a phone call from a man saying they got the wrong Mary Morris. So therefore, it would appear that the only source that we have to confirm this 20-year-old rumor is in fact the words of Miss Gemmel. Is it possible that she did talk to someone at the newspaper that confirmed this with her? I suppose so. But why have they never reported it? And why haven't any of the detectives ever spoke of it? As far as the murder of the first Mary, according to her relatives, she had no enemies. She was loved by everyone. And there was no one that was known that would wanted to have harmed her. But yet, someone or someones killed her, either in her car or somewhere else, and placed her in that car. I believe it's been said that she was found in the passenger seat. The vehicle was set on fire with what was said to be a very strong, flammable accelerant. In fact, the fire that destroyed the car was so intense that the tires were actually burnt off the rims. For a person who had no enemies, who would go through such great lengths to cover up her murder? Did she stop at the gas station in the morning where she could have been abducted and taken by a stranger who wanted to rob her? Could she have been killed by a hitman? Or was this something that was meant to confuse an investigation that was actually meant for someone else? Greetings, folks. This is Charles Goodman, and I hope whoever you are doing well. As you may already know, I am your host of the Area 4 AM News Podcast Network. Today, we're going to talk about a case that has been making headlines across the internet. This short news broadcast contains alarming content, and listener discretion is advised. Over a 3-day period in Houston, Texas, investigators are called to the scene of 2 brutal murders. Both women are found in their cars. They look surprisingly alike, and most shockingly of all, they share the same names. Is there a connection, or are these crimes an astonishing coincidence? Just 3 days after the first Mary Morris was killed, the case took a strange twist, and the circumstances were as chilling as they were unbelievable. Not far from where Mary's body was found, another woman had been viciously murdered. She too was killed in her car, and incredibly, her name was also Mary Morris. 39-year-old Mary McGinnis Morris had recently moved to Houston, Texas from West Virginia. She was in a 17-year marriage with her husband Mike Morris, and she worked as a nurse practitioner and medical director at a company called Union Carbide. It was alleged that McGinnis Morris had a rocky, souring relationship with her husband Mike. There were reports that Mary had an affair with a family friend, and Mike could not secure gainful employment, which created financial pressures between the couple. Besides her rocky marriage, it was reported that McGinnis Morris had some problems at work as well. This started in early 2000 when the company hired a male nurse named Dwayne Young. For whatever reason, Mary had numerous clashes with Dwayne, and the two did not get along. In fact, Mary reportedly became frightened of Dwayne, and according to Mike Morris, Mary asked him to purchase a gun for her protection. The firearm was registered to Mike, and Mary kept it under the driver's seat of her car. Okay, take some caution here, folks. This is another story from Miss Gemmell. On the Friday before she was murdered, Mary suspected that it was Dwayne who went into her office and rearranged some pictures and other stuff on her desk. She also allegedly found the words "death to her" written on Dwayne's desktop calendar. So we do not know exactly how true this is because, like I said, this came from Lori Gemmell, who was a friend of Mary's, but she is also the same woman that made the claims about the Houston Chronicle newspaper receiving the strange phone call from the man saying that they got the wrong Mary Morris. Allegedly, after making the discovery, Mary McGinnis Morris was upset and left work. Dwayne later arrived at the office and was fired. 2 days later, on Sunday, October 15th, the day of her murder, Mary McGinnis Morris left her home after she did some grocery shopping. She stopped at her office at Union Carbide to administer a flu shot to her friend and co-worker, Lori Gemmell. After McGinnis Morris left the office, she called Lori Gemmell and said she was at the Eckerd drugstore where she had spied a strange man who was giving her the creeps. And according to Gemmell, Mary did not seem alarmed in any way by this guy that was creeping her out, I suppose. She actually told her that she was going to head back to her office and shut down her computer and check out of the building. But that would never happen because 12 minutes later, McGinnis Morris would make a blood-curdling 911 call from her cell phone. No recording or transcript of this 911 call has ever been released to the public, but it was said that Mary McGinnis Morris was in her car being beaten to death before being shot. These were her last moments alive, and according to investigators, the recording of the call is chilling and disturbing, and anyone who has ever heard it was blood-chilled by listening to it. In fact, it was said that Mrs. McGinnis Morris put up a tremendous struggle while trying to fight off and defend herself from her murderer. After being shot in her head with her own gun, the one that was nestled underneath her driver's seat, the killer left it there in an attempt to make it look like she had killed herself. But because of the chilling 911 call and the brutalness of the crime, investigators knew that that was not the case in the horrific murder of 39-year-old Mary McGinnis Morris. In fact, her skull had been battered and the passenger side door of her car was left open and it was splattered with blood. She was found the following day by a tow truck driver who spotted her Dodge Intrepid on the side of the road, just 25 miles away from the secluded drainage area where Mary Henderson Morris was found inside her charred and burnt Chevy Lumina 4 days earlier. According to police, about 2 hours after her murder, Morris' husband Mike made a 4-minute call to her cell phone. So if Mary Morris died 2 hours earlier during her 911 call, who was Mike Morris talking to? When asked by investigators, Mike Morris admitted to making the call, but he claimed the phone had never been answered, and he just let it ring for the full 4 minutes because he was frantically worried about trying to find his missing wife. According to investigators, it would have been impossible for the cell phone to ring for 4 minutes. According to phone records, the phone had been answered. So there is no doubt that Mr. Michael Morris is a suspect in his wife's murder. After all, she had a $700,000 life insurance policy through her employment at Union Carbide. According to one of the detectives working the case, Mike claimed that he was at the movies at the time with his young daughter, and he refused to allow investigators to interview her. He also obtained an attorney and refused to take a lie detector test, saying that he didn't trust the results because he was on antidepressant medications. Later, he would tell Unsolved Mysteries that he had nothing to do with the arrangement of Mary's murder. Another suspect in Mary McGinnis's murder is her co-worker Dwayne Young. After all, it was rumored that Dwayne caused a lot of shenanigans with Mary at work. Perhaps the answer lies in the possible link between the deaths of Mary McGinnis Morris and Mary Lou Morris. One theory speculated that a bumbling contract killer had been hired to murder the second Mary Morris and killed the first one by mistake. That theory was fueled in part by a rumor started by a co-worker of the second Mary Morris. Her name was Lori Gemmel. She claimed that a telephone call was allegedly made to the Houston Chronicle newspaper saying something to the effect that they got the wrong Mary Morris. The hit gone wrong theory was further bolstered when detectives determined that the wedding ring of the first Mary Morris was missing. Despite all of the speculation that the two murders have been connected, detectives are in doubt. In conclusion, consequences do happen, and even the most unlikely cannot be ruled out. As unlikely as it sounds, it's not impossible. Houston is a large area with its share of crime. According to detectives, there were 300 homicides in the Houston area during the year of 2000 when the two Marys were murdered. But it's probably safe to say that those murders took place in high-risk areas of the city. So the astronomical odds of two women who shared the same names and were from middle-class areas and did not participate in any high-risk activities to be murdered in such similar circumstances within the same period of time is highly unlikely. In a logical manner, it simply just doesn't make any sense. And to say that a hitman got it wrong the first time, but got it right the second time, just doesn't make any sense either. It seems that the more logical answer would be that at least one Mary was the main target, and maybe the other was a red herring created by a killer in an attempt to confuse an investigation. But then again, this would not be the first time that a hitman has gotten it wrong. Nevertheless, it's been 20 years, and there is at least one murderer on the loose. Let me know what you think, folks. At this point, we're going to wrap it up for our Who Murdered the Two Marys Part 2, the second Mary Morris podcast. If you like what you hear here, please like and subscribe to this channel. We will take all the help we can get, and I agree that some of you will disagree with some of the things said here today. You can also help me out by pointing out any mistakes you think that I might have made during this podcast. I will also put a link down below in case you want to visit me on Twitter. I'm Charles Goodman. I want to thank you for joining me today, and until next time, I will see you on the flip side.